My name is Campbell. I've been in and around UFO studies for a little over 50 years. So I've gone through a lot of things as I've learned, and we're speaking here from Paracom conference in 2014 in Kansas City. And we've been asked to say a few words about what we've been doing over the last few years. And I'll start with the more recent things first. We've recently discovered some major pieces of UFO debris that was discovered in 2011, and found some more in 2012. It's now being analyzed for the second time. MUFON has taken Mutual UFO Network, has taken all of our pieces to have analyzed for the second time. We've had them done the first time. We had some donors that helped us with the money, and now we're analyzing all the other pieces. So I'm going to show you today some of the things we're working on. And these are projects that have gone back, about 10 or 12 years or more. I've been working this particular crash site, known as the Plains of St. Augustin site, since 1994. And we started finding things the first day we were there. And I've been a kind of a Western historian, and I've written several books on Western migration and pioneers, and we get a pretty good feel for what you should be at a site and what it should not be at a site. So our first visit to this site in west central New Mexico in 1994 told us that there was a lot of anomalies on the surface, and we've did a lot of investigation to find out why. Well, this is a picture of myself at the site in 1997. I was at the site myself for about 8 years. I came about every other summer and did excavation. And later on, you'll see some of the things that we managed to find doing our digging. But this one was one of the early excavations about 1994. Now, stretching up to the present, we are going to see some of the things that we started finding at the site. This is recent material which was found in 2011. And we've had it analyzed, and what we found here is a very, very hard exterior of the UFO craft. We know it's exterior craft from the UFO because we've had the isotope work done on it. The laboratories have told us that there's no metal like this in 1947 or up to the present time. So it is very, very unique, hard metal, which we believe is the exterior of the UFO. These are two photos of some material that we found at the site. Now, the one I'm holding, the upper one here, is a piece of material, two pieces of material we found, and we found out that they go together. That the one was on the bottom of the other one, and the top one is a honeycomb, very similar to a wasp nest. And if you cut it down, if you cut the wasp nest down, get out the dirt and everything out of it, you'll see that there's hollow channels like a wasp embryo would use in a wasp nest. Well, this is called a honeycomb material, and we believe it went all the way across the 25-foot bottom of the craft. And these little brown dots that you see below here were an integral part of the propulsion system, and we believe it nullified gravity. We're not sure what propelled the craft, but we do know that those little brown dots, they were both above and below the honeycomb, which I'll show you here. And those dots were like cylinders, like spark plugs in a cylinder. They would fire some kind of energy back and forth inside the honeycomb. In each channel of the honeycomb, there may be 1 million channels on the bottom of a 25-foot UFO, and each channel was one of these things firing up and down both, creating an energy that definitely contributed to anti-gravity. So this is one of the things that we've discovered, and our project to this time in 2014, we believe we're the first civilians to find this material and analyze it and then publicize it. Most of the people felt that all the material that was out there was picked up by the Army and that there wouldn't be any more. We're the first ones we know of, to find much more material. This was a very, very early Army cleanup site, and they did a snafu here. The Army was time for a screw up, and they apparently covered the site with loose dirt, and not knowing that in the 14 inches of rainfall each year would wash away the dirt in several years. So we found much of our debris on the surface of the place where we're working at this site. Back to the early history of the UFOs in my life, I started the project getting interested in UFOs right after I got out of the Navy, about 1954. And I read several books, and I realized that there was a lot more out there than I was aware of as a young man, a teenager earlier on, and I got out of the Navy when I was 22. And we never really quite found a religion that we liked. And I sort of thought it would be interesting in UFOs to find out what people who were from other planets, if we ever found out, what they worshipped. I didn't find anything here that particularly turned me on in a way of worship. I wasn't looking for a place to worship, you understand. I was just looking for some things that made sense. What I had seen out there didn't make a lot of sense intellectually to me. So I didn't come into the UFO study with any baggage to speak of. I didn't have any prejudice to overcome or anything like that. So everything I learned was new and generally exciting. So we started doing some reading, started corresponding with some people involved with UFOs. We started a National Investigations Committee for Aerial Phenomena group in the Kansas City area in 1957, and we were lucky to be picked as chairman of that group. And then we had a very strange incident. A famous UFO contactee, person who claimed that he'd been on a spaceship and taken to Mars and Venus and all kinds of things, came to Kansas City and gave a talk to a UFO study club. I had been affiliated with them. However, I wasn't at that particular time, but he essentially went to Davenport, Iowa to do Never Talk, and when he came back here on the train, he said, well, I've been picked up by the aliens, he called them space people, in the Kansas City train yard, and they took me to Davenport. I thought, well, that's a nice way to get to Davenport. It's a long train ride. So I let Major Keyhole know it in Washington, D.C. He was in charge of NICAP, and he wanted to know if I would like to investigate it. I said, well, I'm here at your disposal. So he sent me a badge, actually a badge, that little black case and the whole thing. And he said, this will get you in to see the railroad detectives. And I thought, well, I don't want to go see the detective, you know. He said, well, you need to start with the people who are in charge. And they will give you names of people who you can go to. But you need to get the okay people at the top okayed first. He said, it's been our experience that you don't start with the people who had the sightings or had the experience. You start with their superiors. Then they bring them on board, then you're great. So it was great advice. We went down to see the railroad detective in the Kansas City train yard, and he gave us the name of the conductor, the engineer, the fireman, and a brakeman or two on this train called the Rock Island 508. From Davenport, the train went right on up to Minneapolis, and there was a side car that went over towards Davenport. It was about another hour and a half away. In any case, he came back and told us the story, and then told the UFO Study Club the story. And I have a transcript from the meeting in 1957 telling about his trip in a UFO. And he was, the guy telling it is the fellow who was the president of our club at that time. So we investigated it, and we found out that the train had stopped very briefly, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, at a railroad crossing where two tracks cross. It's the law. And right near there is a tower, and then they witnessed the whole thing. So the train didn't stop more than 2 or 3 seconds before it proceeded on, the 508 that headed to Davenport. And Adamski claimed that the train stopped, he got out and walked around and down the gravel and to see this scenery and so on. Well, he just got on the train to Kansas City 10 minutes earlier. Why would he want to walk around and look at scenery, you know? So he said some guy approached him, a normal-looking guy approached him and said, "Would you come with me, Mr. Adamski?" He said, "Well, what about my luggage?" He said, "Well, I'll pick it up for you." So the guy claimed he reached in the train, got the luggage. And in those days, you couldn't reach luggage from the outside because of the great big steel door came down. It was actually covered the steps so nobody would fall off. So that's called the vestibule. Well, the guy reached in and got his luggage, which apparently hadn't been put up yet, and took him to a wooded area. They drove a little while. They went to another wooded area and found the UFO was waiting for them. And so he said, well, while he was on his way to Davenport, they took a side trip to Venus and back. And I mean, this story gets a little heavier as she keeps going. And a lot of foolish people will think, he's telling this story for people who are gullible. And I'm afraid I wasn't in that crowd. I wasn't gullible at all about what he was saying. But we think he probably is telling this story because he's on his way to England that summer. This was April or May. And oftentimes the contactee person has to have a phony story to get more attention. They can't just keep telling the old story. You don't get wine and dine on one story. You got to have a new one. So his was his new one. Well, he picked the wrong place to have a new experience in Kansas City when we just started an ICAP affiliate. And Major Keyhole told me later, he said, boy, he could have picked anywhere in the country but your place. We investigated it and found it to be totally false. Got a hold, went down to Trenton, Missouri, which is down south of here, and to get a hold of the conductor. We got a hold of brakemen who lived in Kansas City, have statements from all of them. All of them corroborate that, one, they don't remember him even being on the train, and two, the train didn't stop long enough for anybody to get off. And so that was essentially the story, how I got my start in investigation with the UFO people. And this was written up in the NICAP magazine later that year. And we called the story George Adamski and the Rock Island 508. And that was our first experience. And we sputtered along for a year or so, and then I moved to Colorado after 1960, and I was a coach, football coach. And we stayed in small schools, except for a few years, for almost 30 years. And in small towns, you don't have a lot of interest in UFOs. There are not that many people who have read much about it. They don't have any news about it. They don't sell books there in the town. So we couldn't really start any UFO discussions or groups in those early years. We just had to just put our nose to the grindstone to get our teaching career over with. So I worked about 1959, worked from 59 to 89, 30 years. And so we got back into the UFOs about 1990. And Mr. Friedman, Stanton Friedman, was the one who told me about the rancher that had a gap in his sagebrush. And they could never figure out what it was. Nothing would grow there, by the way. And there wasn't any trench, so they couldn't figure out what this gap was doing in the sagebrush. Well, it turns out that a UFO had crashed in there and gone through the sagebrush and taken out a swath of sagebrush, maybe 100 feet long and 25, 30 feet wide. We were able to determine that the material we found in there couldn't have washed in, that there was a slight rise in the one end to the other, which means that the material couldn't wash uphill. We found lots of tin cans and discarded material, earthly stuff. But underneath it was the material from the UFO. It couldn't have been hidden in a better place. It wasn't deliberate. I don't think the Army was that smart. They brought in some sand to fill in the trench, and in the sand was debris. And over the years, the sand washed away from the debris, leaving a flat surface with tin cans sitting on it. Who would think to look under tin cans for UFO debris? I don't think they were smart enough to figure it out, but it sure worked out that well. And of course, if you use a lot of tin cans, you can't use a metal detector. So our first few years, we didn't use metal detectors at all. This is our I-beam that we found in 2012. And I-beams are especially sacred in UFO debris because the original report by Jesse Marcel talks about an I-beam, and people had symbols on it and all kinds of things. Well, ours is huge. It's about 13 and a half inches long and about 1.5 inches high. And how we think the I-beam works is that it sits on the top of some other material, including the honeycomb we discussed earlier, and a plate underneath it and a plate under the honeycomb. And the I-beam, we think, goes all the way across, a basket weave of I-beams goes all the way across the bottom of a UFO. And attached to the bottom of the basket of I-beams is the light material and the heavy material. And so you see the I-beam, light material, heavy material. And we've written a book and that is well explained in there. But this was one of our bigger finds was this I-beam. One of our nice finds was this particular piece of the exterior of the craft. It was very hard. We had a great deal of difficulty getting through it. We had to use a Dremel machine to get some samples off instead of the lab. And it broke 3 discs and almost broke the demo. It was so difficult. Extremely hard material. We're pretty sure this is the part of the exterior of the UFO. We found this in 2011. One of the things I wanted to mention was that we had almost 26 people involved in the later investigation of the crash on the plane of San Augustin. We had one group that had 15 people and 7 metal detectors. They found a huge amount of material. And prior to that, they had analyzed our material. Mr. John Rao of the Open Minds Organization had put up the money to analyze our material that we had found earlier, up through 2010. And we found the material to have isotopic ratios that were not known to any metal on Earth. Now, this is just ordinary foil. I thought it was just something off a barbecue or something. But apparently the locals didn't use foil at all until the mid-50s when it had enough power to use a freezer. So we had, the first thing we first started with foil. And we found a shoe sole, we found other things, but one of the things we found was the foil. Well, we had it analyzed and found out that foil was coated with very, very exotic coatings of various elements. And we have 15 pieces of that foil, 5 of which have been to analysis, scientific analysis. 10 we're still waiting to do. I have 5 more pieces, and a friend of mine has another 5 or 6 pieces down at the Gallup, New Mexico. Well, we put all this material together. All this material we worked on is in the last 15, 12 years is this book. And we originally called it The UFO Crash at San Augustin. Well, when we were sure we had found the material, and we changed it to Finding the UFO Crash at San Augustin. So we took everything we knew about the crash. All the materials are analyzed, and scientific material has gone out to various laboratories. We had a Mr. Steve Coburn, who was a materials analyst from a master's degree from UCLA in 1992. Mr. Campbell was one of the first ones to analyze our material. He sends it off to various labs, and every time we send a piece of material off to be analyzed, it's $500. So we learned early on not to mention we were doing UFO research. Well, we found out from some other projects that when we say we're doing UFO research, they'll just send you back your check and say forget it. So we found that we just say we want the research done, and then here's your check to do it from. Well, Mr. Coburn worked for a lab that was well known. So he would send his material in with that to be analyzed, and he'd give his bookkeeper $500. It worked out fine. They didn't know they were analyzing UFO material, and there's no chance of getting compensated, but they just thought it was something out of an industrial metallic scrap pile. They didn't know what it was, and they didn't care. So That's one of the things that, one of the interesting things about this was that we had to keep quiet about the analysis. We started our website about 5 or 6 years ago, and you can get to it today. This is 2014 by going to www.ufocrashbook.com. So you can find out about the project, and you can see what the 16 chapters in the book, and it goes almost 90 photographs, and the website gives you a good overview of the book itself.